In Tasman, we have a disproportionate risk of flooding and inundation compared to other parts of our country. We've got about 7,400 properties in flood and inundation zones, and they have a combined value of nearly $6 billion. So we really need to think about adapting to what's coming with a warming climate. So here's what I discovered or learned on my own property, keeping in mind I'm not an expert for river management, but I have made my own observations on a very small scale, and I'm going to share those with you. Let's start at the top of the catchment. Usually forests on the hills act a bit like sponges. They absorb the rainwater and then slowly release it into the catchment. Now we have some pine forestry in the headwaters of our creek. So when Cyclone Geta hit, all this area was clearfelled and bare earth. So all the water just rushed down the hills and into the creek, taking sediments and silt with it and causing a bit of havoc further downstream. I'll show you. So rushing down a fairly narrow channel down in the gully, all this water just eroded the banks and redistributed quite a bit of new material. That material landed in our irrigation pond and reduced its capacity by about a quarter. Since Geta has struck, I've tried a few things on my property to mitigate future flood events. The most valuable asset in this gully is a fence post, which was nearly washed out at the Geta event. So I've worked to protect it and channel the water past it. As a consequence, the water is rushing through here with such force that it was threatening another one of my assets, a little bridge that I've built. So now I had to protect that as well. As a result, the creek keeps cutting itself deeper into the ground and shifting more material. And where it can finally fan out and slow down, that's where it distributes all that material. So I've come up with a different strategy. And rather than channeling and restricting the water down here, I've actually planted the whole width of the floodplain as a native wetland habitat with Caraxector species. And the last storm actually showed how hugely successful this concept was, because all the sediments that came down have been caught by these grasses. The land has probably built up about 1/2 meter, but none of that material has actually gone into the pond. So what I've learned from this on a larger scale is, with increasing frequency and ferocity of these sort of flood events, we might have to think carefully about how much longer we can control the force of this floodwater and which areas we really need to protect. I think there are some concepts out there whereby you allow the rivers to flood some of the land on the floodplain. It doesn't mean that this land cannot be farmed, but it does mean that we have to think very carefully about what sort of assets we put into harm's way. And of course we also need to think about what happens upstream. The sort of forestry models that we're applying at the moment, the forestry systems where we just leave bare earth, maybe that has to change, and maybe that has to go to a management system that puts back the sponge function of the forests that actually soak up the water where it falls on the ground. And maybe we need to re-establish some of those wetlands in the headwaters of our rivers, all of which would flatten the peak of those flood flows. Now, I understand that all of these are really big and impactful decisions, and that we have to be really careful about how we do this and how we transition and when we transition. But we have to start having these discussions about adaptation now, because otherwise there will be a point, it might not be very far away, where we are simply overwhelmed with the cost and the impact of these recurring flood events.